Hello and welcome to the Full Pour. This is Sip Magazine's Facebook Live broadcast that we do every Thursday at 5, live at 5. And we are really excited to be here today because A, it's our one excuse to wear makeup and regular clothing this week, and B, shower, and C, we are tasting Italian white wines with one of our favorites, a Sip family member, Zach Geballe, who is a writer, sommelier, business owner, everything, long-time storied restaurant personality in the Seattle area. And we love Zach, and we are excited for him to join us in just a few. We're tasting some really fun wines today. They are perfect for your summer picnic, which is where I often picnic on my front stoop. I live in Georgetown, home to a lot of planes in Seattle, so you might hear those flying overhead, but it just really shows you the reality, the depths, the reality and authenticity we're going for here. I'm drinking an Arnese from a tiny little producer in Piedmont, Italy called Vellino. I'm super excited about it. I got it from Champion Cellars up in the Greenwood neighborhood of Seattle. You all can get it. I think it's about $21 after tax, if I remember. And I'm psyched. It's the first time I've had Arnese in so long, which is just one of my favorite Italian white wines, but also like favorite oyster wine. And if you've ever seen me at a seafood event in public, I put down some oysters, and this is the perfect thing to wash it back with. So, all right, well, I'm going to bring Zach in here to join us. Oh, I added him and then removed him. Let's try again. There we go.
You haven't second thought already, Erin?
Yeah, it's just blipping all over the place. So as you can tell, Zach and I are digitally in Italy. I think this is a vineyard in Tuscany, which I don't think we're tasting any wines from that region today, but that's okay.
Yeah, the whites from Tuscany are a little. There's some good ones, but it's not the most exciting place in Italy for white wine.
No,
red wine maybe. But not
yeah, red. Chianti's great. Super Tuscans. So we're excited to have you here, Zach. Like I said, you are a longtime family member of SIP.
Oh, thanks.
But let's start with getting to know you a little bit. So can you tell us how you got into wine?
Sure. Well, it's actually the fault of the region that this picture is ostensibly from. I think so I grew up in Seattle, and my stepmother, Susan Kaufman, was the longtime owner of Serafina, which is I
always forget that.
Yeah, so a pretty storied restaurant here in Seattle. And when I was a kid growing up around the restaurant, wine was kind of always just a part of the family dinner experience. Not necessarily always for me, although if I wanted to have some when I was a teenager, I was usually allowed a little pour, especially on the weekends. But it was always just kind of a part of dining. You know, food was a big deal for my family, and I think food for me was kind of my first entry point into wine. And then when I was 19, I was in Florence on a school trip, and my dad had given me some advice, which was pretty good advice, which was go find the best bistecca alla fiorentina, which is kind of a traditional dish of Florence. It's basically a giant T-bone steak cooked really, really hot and really rare, and then kind of they squeeze lemon on it. It's very traditionally made from like the local breed of cow. And so I went with a friend of mine. We found a place nearish where we were staying, and my dad had sort of given me money for that meal. He's like, look, I want you to go do this. Here's some money, go enjoy yourself. And so we were there, we sat down feeling like big shots. We were like the only Americans, also the only teenagers in the restaurant. And the server sort of asked, well, what do you want to drink? And I didn't know much about wine. I knew a very little amount about Italian wine because that's most of what we had at home. But I sort of was like, well, I don't know. What do you recommend? And yes, agreed. Bistecca alla Fiorentina is awesome. So they sort of asked, I sort of said, well, what do you recommend? And he kind of looked at us, and I give him credit as someone who worked in restaurants for a long time. He took us reasonably seriously and actually recommended a real wine. And I remember mostly just being like, wow, this was 2003, the beginning of 2003. And he recommended an 80 euro Brunello di Montalcino, which I'd never heard of or tried before. But my friend and I kind of decided, well, what the heck, we'll go for it. And so we we got the bottle of wine. We had the Bistecca alla Fiorentina. Those of you who've had the two together, especially in Florence, can understand how magical a pairing it was. And it was, for me, kind of this moment where I was like, oh, wow, this is really a thing. Like there's wine isn't just a way to get drunk, which as a teenager was mostly what I used it for. And it's not even just something that you can maybe enjoy drinking on its own, but when combined properly with food, it can expand the and heighten the experience. And from there, I ended up going into the restaurant industry. Wasn't always my intention, but that's kind of, I kept finding myself drawn back to it. And after working in restaurants as a server and bartender for a few years, I found just more and more interested in wine. And between working in restaurants and eventually pursuing my sommelier certification, writing, including for a number of years, and it's just kind of become my life. So now here I am. Actually, of course, in the background you see some of my spirits collection, but trust me, there's a lot of wine in this house too. So.
Well, you touched a lot on just this now, but food and wine is a lot of the foundation of who you are professionally. It sounds like, and
also, I think mostly what I'm made out of at this point.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah. I mean, you and I follow each other on our personal Instagrams, and I think we often have duels of whose food home cooked is more delicious. Like
you're a better photographer. That's a given.
I don't know. You always make deliciously roasted meats, usually surrounding the high holidays. And I'm like, what is that? I need that. Mm-hmm. So that said, what is your favorite wine and meal pairing? I know. You can give like 6 if you want.
Boy. Well, okay. So let me, I'm going to preface this by saying one caveat. So the first is that I think that this is just personal preference, right? This isn't necessarily what I think is the best. This is just maybe my favorite. We have a lot of strong attachments to making duck. It's something that is special to my wife and I. And so to me, there's really no pairing that I enjoy more than roast duck and really one of 2 wines. So kind of depending on the mood we're in. So either sticking with the Italian theme, Barolo or some other Nebbiolo-based wine from Piedmont, or Syrah, sometimes Washington, sometimes French. And kind of like I said, where we go on that is based a little bit on what I'm serving it with and how we're feeling. I will say, though, that the other pairing that I really, really love and I find to be super compelling, not something that I unfortunately get to have at home very much. This is one of those things where not being able to go out to restaurants sucks. But I actually really love things like organ meats with Gewürztraminer. It's one of the few examples I can think of where it takes a wine that really great examples of Gewürztraminer I can enjoy, but it's not really what I would opt for, and turns it into like the wine I most want, which is kind of a cool thing, I think.
So you said like a liver,
or
something, or moose, or
it works well with like chicken liver mousse, but even more with something like tripe or not so much sweetbreads because those tend to be a little bit lighter, but liver, that kind of, if you're getting into that kind of thing, blood sausage, that which isn't technically an organ meat, but I think people get the point.
I love it. Nerd alert. Okay, so let's talk about Disgorged. Tell us about this Disgorged wine, and then tell us what you've been doing lately.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think what Disgorged is now is maybe not entirely what I envisioned it being when I started it. So actually, really, truly, the idea for Disgorged started actually with me wanting to do a podcast. And I have a degree in broadcast journalism. And after many years of not doing much on the broadcast side and doing some stuff on the written side, I kind of had the idea, well, I kind of want to go into I want to talk about wine and do it in a podcast form. And I'd always sort of liked the idea of using Disgorged, which is a wine term for something related to wine. And it made sense to me with a podcast. So started doing that. Full disclosure, Erin was a guest on the podcast back when it was a thing. And that was the beginning of Disgorged in a lot of ways. And then I sort of thought, well, maybe along with that, I will do some events. I also did a quasi short-lived pop-up wine bar on Queen Anne here in Seattle. But basically, Disgorged kind of has gone through a lot of iterations. At this point, it's basically a series of online wine classes, given that these days in-person wine classes, tastings, et cetera, aren't really a thing. So to me, it is very much a case where I think um, it is always evolving. But right now, like I said, it's a series of online wine classes that I conduct that are actually kind of like this, except no one interviews me. I don't talk much about myself. I talk about the wines, but you're stuck hearing about me for now.
And I just dropped the information on the screen of where you can learn more and sign up for one of Zach's classes. And they've been really well received so far. I know we've been having a lot of fun, and I'm assuming people are learning a lot and then probably getting pretty drunk.
You know,
respectfully respectfully drunk.
Yeah. I mean, people are in their houses. It's not really like, I feel like these days, if on a Saturday, which, I mostly hold my classes on Saturday afternoon / evening. So if that just leads you to relaxing a little bit after what has been I don't even know how to describe it, few months, that's cool with me.
No, it's cool. The world was on fire, drank everything.
Yeah, so exactly.
Let's get to our topic for the day. And when you and I were talking about what we wanted to talk about today, you had brought up Italian white wines as kind of a passion of yours. And so what speaks to you, or what speaks to you about Italian white wines?
Why am I wasting your time with these? Yeah, I understand.
No, these are delicious. We want to know why you're all blessed.
Well, I think it's probably two reasons. The first is I'm always been partial to an underdog story, and I feel like with Italy and wine, white is the big underdog. Italy is famous for a lot of amazing red wines and gets a lot of attention for those, and the white wine has often been relegated to the thing you drink on, in Cinque Terre overlooking the sea, or you have it while you're waiting to decide what you're really going to eat and drink. And that's fine. I mean, there's definitely some perfectly innocuous, quaffable white in Italy, but there's also a lot of really amazing white. And what's cool about Italy is it has this incredible wealth of indigenous varieties, both white and red, but the whites in particular have until recently not gotten much in the way of any kind of attention from press, from sommeliers and other people in the wine trade. And so not only is there a lot to discover, but the other thing is, like, there's these amazing wines that are really cheap. I mean, really, really cheap in the sense of, like, sometimes they're $12 or $13 at a store. And for me, when I think about inexpensive wine that's really good, I think about, under $25 basically. And to me, that's a lot of what excites me. Not that I don't love more expensive wine, especially when someone else is paying for it, but it's true that for me, there's a lot to be said about wine that can be made and available at a price point that feels like nearly an everyday wine that's really exceptional. And I think Italy offers a lot of that on the white side.
Well, let's stop just talking about it and start drinking it.
I mean, I already started, obviously.
I mean, so have I. A little splish splash. So we are going to start with the Arnese. So you brought in Arnese from Vietti. And for starters, let's talk about what this grape variety is and what characteristics that drinkers should expect from one that is of varietal correctness.
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of underdog stories, I mean, Arnese is a great example of this. So most of the Arnese in Piedmont, so that's where we are in northwestern Italy, is planted in the Roero, which is, so the Langhe, which is the more kind of famous region on the eastern side of the Tanaro River. It's the home to Barolo and Barbaresco, kind of the two most famous appellations in the region, is much more devoted to the production of red wine. And Roero is kind of split. There's a fair bit of Nebbiolo planted there as well, but there's also a fair bit of Arnese. Now, in the past, not so much. Arnese went through a period of time where it was really being ripped out, either replaced with different varieties, sometimes international white varieties like Chardonnay, and sometimes just the land was used for other agricultural purposes. And it got to the point where basically there were only two wineries producing Arnese, Vietti, which I'm drinking here, and then Bruno Giacosa. And those two producers were really dedicated to protecting and preserving it. Doesn't mean that they had the only holdings, but they were the only ones who were making it on a commercial scale. And it's had a bit of a resurgence. I mean, Piedmont in general has definitely become more and more prominent in the world of wine as the quality of the wine kind of across the board has risen, especially outside of the really benchmark Barolo producers, which have always been making great wine, but the overall level and quality is much higher than it was 30, 40 years ago. And so, but Arnase was really an afterthought, even though, and the largest reason was it's just kind of a pain in the ass to grow, from what I understand. It's not easy. It's not super vigorous. You don't get a huge yield. And it just sort of didn't seem worth the effort for a lot of producers. And they found, though, that with a little more attention to detail, with less emphasis on making huge volumes and more emphasis on making quality, it produces really exceptional wine, I think. And so to your question about what to expect, I mean, thinking about kind of points of comparison for people to what they might have had otherwise, what they might be familiar with, I find that one of the most common sort of associations I have with Arnase with Chablis, so Chardonnay from France. And the reason for that is it has a similar aromatic profile, a little bit of a kind of tart green apple nose, although there's often a little bit of a white flower character on Arnase that you don't typically find with Chardonnay. And structurally, the wine is quite lean, crisp. You don't typically see this wine made in with oak. It's not impossible, but they're pretty rare. Usually stainless steel fermentations, and then basically left in stainless steel tanks until it's bottled, as is the case with this wine here. And so I think it's a great example. We were talking about oyster wines before. I think it's a great oyster wine, like Erin said. It's great for kind of lighter fare in general. It's a great summertime wine. But it's not, what I love about it is it's got all the characteristics that make it easy drinking and kind of fresh. And it's a wine that you don't have to pay attention to, but there's a lot of complexity there. There's a lot of textural elements to the wine that, if you do want to think about it a little more seriously, reward you for doing so. But it doesn't demand that of you, which to me is a great thing for a wine to do.
I love that you compared it to Chablis, which is a wine that I love as well, but it has that like structural minerality to it that Chablis has, and then that the acidity that isn't bracing when you're drinking it, but after it goes down, you have that salivating, residual salivating acidity in the finish that is just like, I love that. I love that kind of quality. So and again, to talk about oysters, because I love them, that's what makes it such a perfect oyster wine, because I feel like that minerality really matches that brininess of an oyster, but then that like salivating, sweeping, finishing acidity it cleans and cuts up the kind of the intense meatiness of an oyster. And I'm speaking raw oysters here too. But it's fine if you want to pan fry them. It's just don't talk to me. That's it. But what else? Let's keep talking food with Arnase. What else would you say? I know we talked about maybe doing picnic wines pairings. Like, what would you throw in a picnic basket with a bottle of Arnase?
So I think, some of this is again kind of leading on what are good pairings with these sort of minerally high acid whites. So I think it does really well with firmer cheeses and soft cheeses too. But I especially think of something like not a traditionally Italian cheese, but something like a Tome or a Comte or something like that, where you're getting a little bit of that kind of crystalline quality in the cheese itself. I think it works really nicely with charcuterie even. You go to this part, you go to sort of Italy, as is the case in most of northern Italy, you get a lot of charcuterie. It's sort of shoved in your face, which is not the worst thing. It works beautifully as well with a really light, fresh pasta. Maybe not something you would take on a picnic, although if you took pasta salad, I think this could work really nicely. And then the last kind of picnic thing that I think this works really nicely with is like if you're gonna do I'm trying to think of how I would describe it, the right kind of sandwich, like a turkey sandwich could work really nicely with, again, like kind of like Swiss cheese or something like that. Not necessarily something you think about as like a classic food to pair with wine, but if you're going on a picnic, I think that's pretty. I bring sandwiches when I go on picnics a lot of the time, so that works, I think, really nicely. Even like I said, going back to charcuterie, salami or something like that would work nicely too.
The sandwich is just being real. Like that's what I think comes down to. One thing that I've always, got on my soapbox about in talking about beverage pairings is making sure people know they can put them with everyday food. So I'm down for Arnase and the turkey sandwich. I love that.
Yeah.
But then I also am really drawn to I'm thinking like if we go Italian, like some delicious Parmigiano Reggiano and fennel salami, which I'm not going to try and say Finocchio.
Yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah, correct pronunciation. but yeah, there's so many great ways to. That's a great thing about both Italian and French wines, is that they're created to go with food. Like they're created to enhance food. The dish is created to enhance the wine. It's such a partnership, and then what makes it so incredible to drink these kinds of wines. So
Yeah.
We were talking about a couple local producers in the Northwest that are making Ernest, and Zach and I did some deep diving on researching, because hashtag journalists and hashtag social influencer. But we were looking for some local producers that work with these varieties that we're focusing on today. And there's a couple producers in Oregon, in the greater Willamette Valley area, that are making Arnase. Ponzi Vineyards is currently bottling an Arnase, and Canas Feast is also currently bottling an Arnase. And then Hilo Terra has made one in the past, and Remy Wines has made one in the past. A lot of Oregon producers. And then we're also seeing a lot of Italian varieties coming out of the Columbia Gorge, which is cool because that straddles both states. And then oddly enough, a good amount of Italian producers coming out of Walla Walla. And I think a lot of that has to do with just Italian heritage producers in Walla Walla. So we've got a really cool collection of wines here in the Pacific Northwest, but let's keep on that Italy train. So what's up next? We got some Soave.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm drinking. This is from a producer called Suavia. This is the Monte Carbonare, which is basically means mountain of coal, because the vineyard is actually not coal, but it's like a pitch black volcanic soil that looks like coal. And, again, we're talking about Soave. So again, a sort of underdog, well, now an underdog story, a wine that was, has been sort of denigrated in the U.S. because it was so widely imported in bulk and made, a lot of the wine that was on the store shelves 20, 30, 40 years ago was kind of garbage, really mass produced, very uninteresting. And there's still a lot of that out there. But there is some really awesome Soave. And I think so in this case, 100% Garganega, which is the grape that goes into this. You can find some that have some blend of Trebbiano di Soave, Chardonnay. I tend to find that I'm most drawn to the ones that are 100% Garganega. I think it's a really interesting grape with its own interesting flavor set and aromatics, and it doesn't need something else to round it out. And so this example, so Suavia makes sort of their Soave Classico, which is a blend from a number of different vineyard sites, but then they make a few single vineyard wines, including this one. And this is just personally my favorite. I love the intensity that you get from this volcanic site.
And Suave, it's funny, I was trying to find anybody, Suave, and I'm saying it incorrectly, Garganega, nope.
Garganega.
Garganega. There's no one growing that here in the Northwest, but no. In that research, I found how rare it is, because it really is to the Soave, connected to the Soave region, that it is. I mean, it's Champagne, like Champagne.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a lot in Italy in general. There are certainly some varieties, like say Sangiovese, that are grown all over Italy. But most of the Italian varieties tend to be pretty local, if not to a specific region, then to at least a part of the country. So Nebbiolo, like the most famous red variety in Piedmont, is grown in Piedmont and in Lombardy, the neighboring region. And a lot of these other varieties like Garganega are often only grown in a small region. And we're not going to get into the whole history of Italy, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that it really was not a unified country until recently. And so these varieties didn't travel the way that French varieties did throughout the country and throughout other parts of Europe. There are some exceptions, of course, but a lot of times these are kind of pockets of a region or growing conditions where a specific variety does well, and there's just not an opportunity. It wasn't an opportunity for them to be transported. And to this point, referring to like wine in the Pacific Northwest, something like Garganega would have to be a real passion project for a grower and a producer. And I mean, the honest truth is, in a lot of ways, Soave isn't something that has inspired that kind of passion. I think it can and should, but it, to this point, has not.
Well, wishful thinking. Put it out there. Maybe start growing it. I don't know. Got Some comments coming through. Ackerman Clan is coming in strong with their commentary. We have David Flaherty saying hello from the Washington Wine Commission. Hello, David. American Northwest loves Mara Molina Winery. That's their wine. So of course,
they do.
Love it.
They actually, Mara Molina makes one of my favorite Longa Nebbiolos as well. That's in the market.
Nice.
But yeah, the Longa Nebbiolo is an amazing wine as well.
I love a Longa Nebbiolo or a Longa Rosso. It's such an incredible value wine for so much flavor, and that's one thing that I wish. I mean, it usually comes from probably like excess fruit, and I'd like to see more of it. But I understand it being bottled because it's convenient. But
yeah,
love to see more of that stateside. So, all right, we ready for our third wine?
Sure.
We are on to Mestre Berbino, Fiano di Vellino. I did it. There she blows. So Fiano, I actually found a few producers in the Northwest that are growing this, but nobody's bottling it. But namely, Idiot's Grace in Moser, Oregon, in the Gorge. But I don't know if they've ever bottled it. So bottle it if you're listening. I know Apollini in Northern Willamette Valley. I'm blanking on where, Forest Grove. They also grow a ton of Italian varieties and could very well grow too. But anyway, back to Italy, Mestre Berbino.
Yeah, so we've moved from, I should have mentioned, sorry, that Soave is found in the Veneto, so in the north central part of Italy. And then Fiano, we're moving down to Campania, so near Naples, in the southern part of the country. And again, it's sort of a fascinating region. A lot of volcanic soil. You're sort of near Mount Vesuvius and a series of other sort of eruptive events that surround it. And Fiano is one of these varieties. So the Mestre Berbino family is another example, kind of actually like Vieti with Arnase, where when it was very much the case that most producers were ripping out their indigenous varieties in the 40s, 50s, 60s, kind of the post-World War II era, and replacing it with either other varieties from other parts of Italy that were more fruitful or non-Italian varieties that produced higher yields. They decided they were going to stick with their heritage. And actually on the bottle here, it says Radici, which is roots in Italian, and it refers to their line of wines that are the classic indigenous varieties of the region. So Fiano, Greco di Tufo on the white side, and Aglianico on the red. And so they are, I think they've long been considered some of the sort of holders of the history and legacy of the region. And I love Fiano because it's actually very different than the other two wines. So whereas the Vieti Arnase, the Soave have a freshness and a brightness and a levity that comes from being grown in a more northerly climate, more mountain influence, more sort of freshness. Fiano is this, like, in Campania, it's warm, sun, volcanoes, heat, but it's got this beautiful kind of waxy bitterness to it that to me is reminiscent of another style of wine that I really love, which are some white blends from the Rhone Valley in France. Also, you see a lot of them here in Washington, made from things like Roussanne, Marsanne, sometimes including Viognier, Grenache Blanc, etc. It has a lot of similar character to that in that sort of bitterness, unctuousness, but not sweetness and not a sort of weight that comes from oak. Here it's coming from just the grape itself, the phenolic, sorry, I hate to use that word because it's off-putting to some people, but the character of the grape itself, that it's an undeniable fact about me when it comes to wine. So to me, it's like this other awesome side. And when we're thinking about something that would work, where this would work at a picnic, I think it has two things to recommend it. The first is that a little bit differently than the other two wines, I actually think this is a wine that's better, not like ice cold. Like it's actually kind of a little bit more enjoyable when it's had a chance to warm up just a touch. Not like hot or even warm, but just not ice cold. And the other thing about it is that I think because of that bitterness and waxiness, it works really well with things like nuts. It's also really good with like pretzels, potato chips, those kinds of things. I find it to be a really enjoyable wine to pair in that setting, which are, again, picnic staples for me at least.
Now I really want this wine, and I wish I'd picked up this because, like, that you're saying all my keywords that I like. I mean, waxy white, man, I love that kind of stuff, though. But Yeah, I think that all three of these wines are fantastic food wines, and what it really boils down to are, I think, really key structural things like acidity and weight, and just that mouthfeel that you're really getting with these unique whites that are something that are FedEx delivery. And I think that's it's something so unique about this region. Again, bringing it back to us, soapboxing about pairings and why these wines are meant to go with food and why these dishes are meant to go with these wines. And it's just the whole point of it all, right?
Yeah. I want to say, though, I think it's important, and this is something that I feel strongly about with Italian wine in general, not just with whites, but it's often the case with whites, that while it's certainly true that these make for great pairings with traditional Italian cuisine, traditional cuisine in the regions, they don't need to be sort of only locked into that world. So I think that, like tonight, we're going to be having takeout Indian food, and I actually think that Italian whites work really well with that flavor set. I mean, not every last one, and because we have a 2-year-old, we won't be getting anything super spicy. We'll be getting pretty mild, so that works a little bit easier too. But again, I think it's an unfortunate thing that with pretty much any European wine, with the exception of French wine, people think, oh, okay, I'm having Spanish wine, well, I have to have Spanish food. I'm having Italian wine, I have to have Italian food. They go great. It's not to say they don't work, but they're not wines that need to be only reserved for the times in your life when you're enjoying pasta or bistecca alla fiorentina with a red or whatever. Like, you can use these wines in a lot of different ways. And back when restaurants were open and I was doing this, it was often I often love to use Italian whites and reds as well in surprising ways and pairings and tasting menus, because they were, they offered a different dimension than what people expected and could really work with a lot of different foods that people might not have associated them with without trying it in the first place.
So this sounds so boring, and it's not like this bottle's gonna be around for dinner time, but we're having just pesto pasta with like mild Italian sausage for dinner tonight. And I think this would, if the bottle would last till then, which it won't, would be really good pairing this Arnaise with that. So we'll see if it makes it there. But now I want Indian food. So where's your go-to place in Seattle?
I'm pretty dedicated to Taste of India up on Roosevelt.
Yes, that's a great place.
Yeah. I am totally open to the idea that there are other great options. It's just always been like, I've been going there since, well, I've been going to that restaurant since it was actually a previous restaurant called The Hungry You, which was kind of like a Mediterranean restaurant. I used to go there with my dad when I was a little kid, and then eventually I don't know exactly what happened, but the Taste of India took it over probably 20 years ago. And it's just always been one of the ones that I go to. And it's not, we don't live that far away, and it's kind of an easy drive. So, especially nowadays.
Yeah, you gotta keep it close for curbside pickup.
That's
well,
right.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This was awesome to pretend to be in Italy with you. I went there once upon a time, and I think I went through some pictures today, and I was like, remember traveling? So, we were so excited to have you today, and get knowledge slammed on us. It was great knowledge. It's always
hopefully not too overwhelming.
No, it was great. It was always fun to chat with you, and we loved having you here. So thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And to everybody else, if you have not checked out our summer ebook that came out last week, or Saturday actually, we just published an ebook, our first ever. We're very excited about it. It is free, it is digital, and it is downloadable. It is iPhone, tablet, computer ready, and it is a travel ebook, COVID smarts, safe travel ebook of the Pacific Northwest, places that you can road trip to. So the whole focus is on road trips. We're super excited about it. If you're not comfortable doing a road trip, it is also a great shopping list for a staycation. So many of the producers that we feature and places that we go to and restaurants and everything offer delivery. Obviously, restaurants are in their area, but lots and lots of the producers we feature ship straight to your home or off curbside pickup if that is your one adventure for the day. There are so many ways to enjoy this summer safely, smartly, and respectfully, and we hope to give you the tools to be able to do that. So we're super excited about the ebook. Go download it, and thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.